To merge his time with the founders of Cooleaf. And with that said, if anyone is here for junior seminar credit or is a junior at the business school, there will be a sign-in sheet going around, so just be sure to sign in. And with that, let's welcome our speakers for the day.
So before we give our bios or whatever, basically we were supposed to do some presentation, but we were like, screw all that, and then basically thought we could do it more town hall style. So we've got some lessons learned. We can share about what industries we're in. We can share about how we sell, how we haven't sold, how we've hired, how we just have pivoted. We can share all kinds of different stuff. And so there's industry specific questions that you wanted to ask. You could do that. If there's just general startup questions, we can do that. And then obviously we just take it kind of to wherever you want to lead it. That was a general thought process, and that could be more meaningful in the time that we have. So, but anyway, that's kind of where we landed on all this.
That's perfect. Well, thank you all for having me. My name is Stuart Bracken, as he mentioned. I graduated from the one-year MBA program here in 2007. I've started about 5 or 6 companies, I guess, depending on how you count them, through my about 15 years of experience. The first technology company I started was in college at Wake Forest, back around 2000, and at our peak we had about 60 employees working for us. Most recently I have been working on a healthcare technology company, and actually know Sahil pretty well. We're partnered on a project, or a product, I guess you could say. And basically what we're doing is we're taking tablets and we're putting them into ERs, and we're trying to engage patients while they're waiting. That's their whole 3-hour wait window is a problem, so we're trying to make a more captive audience and engage them and drive some satisfaction, etc. Previously, I went to business school in 2007. The other space I know really, really well is the mobile space. After business school, I was an early employee with a company here in Atlanta called Firethorn. We were the first company to put bank accounts on the phone. So now it's pretty ubiquitous and everybody can check their bank account and look at money. Back in 2007, that did not exist. And so our company was the first company to really do that. This is back in the day when you had a phone and it came preloaded with whatever apps or games you had on it. And so you buy it, you open it up and be like, that's awesome, I have Minesweeper, right? Or I have Pinball, or whatever it might be. And so our app was the first app to be on Verizon and AT&T phones. We got bought by Qualcomm in 2008 for $210 million in all cash. So that was nice. And spent about 3 years with Qualcomm looking in the mobile space and financial services specifically. So I have a lot of pretty strong opinions about apps and the whole mobile space. So that's a little bit, I guess, of my background real quickly, and rambling bio.
So I'm Prem Bhatia. I graduated from Emory undergrad, business school. Probably the last class that was not in this building, so in the old school building. Tells you a little bit about, I'm just dating myself a little bit, but and then I realized like a couple years after graduating, I got this sweet new building. I was like, that's great. But that's, so I undergrad at Emory actually. One of the co-founders of Cooleaf. I'm also a co-director at an accelerator that's coming here from Silicon Valley called Founder Institute, which I'm happy to talk to you guys about if you have any questions later on. John and I and third co-founder started this company, Cooleaf. What we're focused in on is actually trying to make employers really kind of the best places to work. If you're familiar with that sort of status of employers that try to attract talent, we're trying to get employers that are not there yet to get to that status, and if they are there, we're trying to keep them at that status and make sure they can kind of attract the right talent and manage that talent. And the way in which we do that is by creating stronger linkages between employees through activities. Whether those activities are things like running clubs, yoga, cooking classes. We bring all sorts of events and experiences that we curate for a number of our clients. We actually do that work for a number of our clients. They leverage our technology platform alone. And so we have clients like from the smallest being about 25 people, like an agency, to Georgia State University, to Cav Medical, which is a hospital system, and other clients of that in that sphere basically. So we raised our angel round, so we're not like 10 steps ahead of where you guys might be at. We're probably like maybe 2 or 3 steps ahead, which is always cool to kind of understand like the war stories of what we've gone through. Raised our angel round in April, closed that, raised a little less than $500,000 basically to accelerate our team, product development, and penetrate the market further in terms of our national footprint. But that's kind of what we're all about. John, if you want to kind of add that.
Yeah, so my name is John Duisberg, co-founder at Qualcomm Prem here. We got one other guy, but we don't let him out very often. Like the Goonies, like he's in the dungeon. He's our tech guy. He's awesome. Yeah, it's been a wild ride. I'd say we're just now getting to the point where we're starting to find more of that product market fit, and where we're actually becoming a technology company as opposed to a services company. We kind of relied on the services side to generate some revenue and traction in the beginning. And just to give you some context on that, we started out with focusing on these employers around health and wellness programs, and so a lot of these companies would want to invest in that for their employees. But the way that we were approaching it was more bringing in the on-site yoga series and fitness classes and boot camps and whatnot. And what we realized really quick is we weren't really getting people healthier. We weren't reducing cholesterol like across the population. We weren't doing blood samples or anything like that. But what the HR folks would tell us is, hey, when I hire a new employee, I tell them to get involved in your program because that's how they start meeting other people in the company. And so they viewed it as a way to build culture and do team building and all this stuff. And so that evolved into more of a comprehensive, like 12-month contract that we would have with these employer clients, where once a month or twice a month we were curating these activities for all their employees, and this could be offsite or onsite. And then we started getting more traction on that. And our whole goal is just to make the HR folks look great, right? And so they don't have to do anything, but they're offering these awesome, benefits to their employees. And then as we started selling into larger employers, they were like, look, this is awesome, guys, but we don't need you to come in and set up our boot camps and stuff like that. But if we can use your technology to manage our own program and just brand it for ourselves, then we'll pay you for that. And so now, we've been focusing more and more on where we will in the future is our platform white labeled for that employer, where their HR team, that's how they use our technology to manage everything that's going on within the company, and this is how their employees find out about what's going on, sign up for it. It could be health and wellness, it could be team building, it could be volunteer community service, all that stuff. That's their way to do that within the company, and so that's our direction moving forward.
So I think that's a great point that he brought up. Obviously, there's sort of two different options when it comes to capital. It's raise money or not raise money. And as much as you can do services revenue to offset the need for outside capital, it's brilliant because you end up owning more of your company. To open the book up on us a little bit, we put in $100,000 in January, and I have, I think, 6 or 7 employees. And all the rest of that money has come through services revenue. And so if you can find services revenue that aligns nicely with what your vision is and use that to subsidize essentially building out your platform, it may be lean, it may be tough, but at the end of the day, you end up owning more of your company, and you end up in a much better place because you get to experiment within the space you're looking in and sort of, take a drummer's walk in the right path. And so I thought that was
I'd echo that. And maybe it'll help to get context. It looks like I'm going to assume most are undergrads. Who's not undergraduate right now here in the audience? Okay, so we got a pretty good mix. Of the people in this room, can I just get a show of hands of who's looking to start their own business in the next 6 months to a year? Okay. And
who's looking to come on board with an up-and-coming startup company? All right.
So
it's our own plug. So.
I'm looking for game developers.
So what I think would be helpful is, for us to go through the war stories, but to answer questions you guys have on, hey, I'm looking to develop an app, maybe it's a mobile app, maybe it's a web app, kind of what are the next steps, what can we answer for you? Let's make it really interactive. Yeah, go ahead.
I had a question about using that service revenue. What if you went to, let's say, Georgia State, and they're like, well, we love your platform, but we want to do a few more features. Would they pay you to actually build that up, and then you can use it for other clients later on? Is that like a
Yeah, it's tough. I think I can answer and you can kind of dive in, but when you started with service revenue, you have to be really careful to make sure you're heading towards a product. That's sort of the trick, the dance that we're playing is, if you read Paul Graham from Y Combinator, it says do things that don't scale. And I think that's absolutely true, right? You start off in a position where you're doing things that don't necessarily scale, and you're really kind of intensively, almost consulting business. You have to be taking those learnings to develop a scalable product. If that's your goal, obviously, if your goal is to become a consulting business, then obviously that's a moot point, right? But yeah, I'd say like, be really careful when you're starting in the services to make sure that you've got the eye on the prize of developing and refining feature product sets. You're not going to be able to make every client happy, so saying no is a really important thing, right? Even for clients like the Georgia States of the world, which are kind of like marquee clients for us. They're coming to us for things on, requests on the platform right now. We're like, yeah, we'll take that into account, we'll phase that in. I mean, honestly, like you gotta play that dance a little bit, right?
We've got a client right now where, so there's this term that we use internally called gatesing. Okay, and so basically one of our lead investor, he told us a story, but apparently Bill Gates, when he was selling his first client, he was selling vaporware. He didn't have anything built, and so we will do this, we'll do that dance when we're selling, and then it's like, oh shit, we gotta build this stuff, and so some of that does happen, I'm going to be open, but we have a client right now where we were somewhat in that situation, but we were building the new platform, and so they came back to us with like 4 or 5 specific requirements, and these are kind of major features. And so, at first we were like, no problem, absolutely. But then as we kind of really started to look at, okay, what is this going to cost us? How much time is this going to take? Is this actually a distraction? We took a really hard look at, does this fit into our platform, or are we doing one-offs? And so, I think you're right. It's almost like willing to fire a customer almost.
Yeah, I don't know, Stuart, if you've had experience on those types of, you're going to get customers that always ping you on random things, because you put technology in front of people, and the first instinct is like, can it do this, right? Or like, how about this? Right? That's just like they think they're being helpful in a way, but they don't realize that they're like, dude, stop, like don't, listen up, right? So
I think it's the toughest thing you got to manage. I don't know what the answer is, but I'm sitting in front of a customer, and one customer says, yeah, if you do this, we'll probably buy it, and then another customer says the same thing, and one ends up buying it and one doesn't. And it's hard to figure out who's going to be the customer that isn't going to buy it and who's going to be the customer that is. I think that's the scope creep of technology is difficult, to say the least.
We were able to do some manual stuff too, as opposed to immediately build. So for example, we had this requirement, so in part of our platform, people can earn reward points for attending things, right? Well, we had a client that said, well, we don't want just people to just get these points when they sign up if they don't show up, right? So they have some check-in feature. Well, we didn't have that built, but yet they were a client, and they're like, we have to have this. So, okay, we created a shared Google Doc, and we sent them a report before their event, and they literally had someone that checked them in on our Google Doc, and then we would issue the reward points in our back end on the admin side, because we were able to do that. And so that's how, and so like to the, whoever our business owner is, we're like, yes, we will meet your requirement, we're going to make sure you're supported, we're going to figure out how to build this, here's how we're going to do it now, and then we're going to walk you up to more of an automated solution. And it's just playing that game a little bit with them, but you can still meet the need, but it may not be the perfect product.
what other questions? Yeah.
It's kind of a general question, but I was curious how y'all how do you differentiate between an idea and a business?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So we had actually, funny enough, we had like a kind of an ideation boot camp that we did with some guys that have made a ton more sort of progress than we have personally. But their whole thing was, look, I'll tell you this right now, which is something that I strongly believe in, is that nobody cares about your stupid idea. Like, I'll just tell you that right up front. Like,
Not even your wife, usually.
like, guess what?
You're the hardest, huh?
You're holding on to it tight because you're like, man, I want anybody to know it's like, about this angle, it just doesn't matter. Like, you're gonna execute on it. And so, first of all, I'll say, like, on that piece, like, ideas are a dime a dozen. And yes, good ideas matter, because ultimately you're gonna have to, if you're an entrepreneur, you have to be always thinking about new ideas. I mean, if you're not, then you probably gotta question whether you really are, someone who's meant for being a startup guy, right? Because I'm keeping track of stuff all the time, like just in a document. Like, oh man, we should think about this, right? But I think the business versus the idea is, I'd recommend this to anybody right now, is that like if you're familiar with lean startup, I mean, I'm sure you guys are kind of familiar with that methodology. We were big believers in that from the beginning. And so a lot of what we did was validate based on smoke and mirrors, essentially, right? Front-end prototyping is so easy today, right? You need a good, strong design guy, and you need to use InVision and other tools like that to make it look like a clickable prototype. Because guess what? 90%, 95% of the world doesn't know the difference between that and a live product. So if there's one thing you're going to do, it's got to be, you know, really validating based on what the front end looks like. Because people love front end stuff, right? They don't care about the back end, right? They like, you know, what does it solve the problem, right? And then are they willing to commit and buy, right? So that's truly when you get to a business. I think, you know, ultimately there's a lot of tests you can kind of put in place to to validate whether, look, not only are they saying, yes, I'm interested, but okay, you need a deposit to go ahead and lock down on our waiting list right now for this, we're going to be rolling it out. Put your money where your mouth is, right? Find out ways that you can actually monetize quickly. Because if you get to a point where you're not monetizing, I think, you know, there's been a lot of talk about, you know, look, don't worry about monetizing. I think that tide is changing a little bit, particularly in B2B. It depends on like what segment you're in. If you're B2C, it may not be as important if you're building tens of millions of users, but you know, the earlier you monetize them, in my opinion, I think the better. I don't know if you...
Next time I have an idea, I'm not going to ask Prem about it.
So first of all, that they keep talking about the Lean Startup method. I'm streaming the Lean Startup Conference live for Georgia Tech students. So we'll be doing that December 9th and 10th in the Hodges Room at Georgia Tech. We'll have an announcement on that soon, but you know, for anybody interested in finding out more about that. Second question, how many employees and customers did you have when you actually seeked out angel investment? And did that play
Yeah, it's a
huge
great
part?
question. And you want to talk to that sort of first, or I know you do.
So I have like 7, 8 employees depending on the day. Seriously. I think I had 3 pilots, maybe 4 going when I first got sort of what outside capital I took. And so I think for me it was an idea that at that point that I began to pilot in the healthcare systems, and I had them up and running, and then I had a little bit of data behind them. Said, look at this, we are getting 30% sign-up rate and a 2% sign-up for this new product we can sell internally.
Just based on 3 customers?
Yeah, based on 3 customers, but 3 customers volume, right? So, you know, if you can have a customer that has a lot of volume, then you can become much more comfortable on it pretty quickly.
I think it really depends on the business, right? Right, because like you know, if you're talking about, hey, I've got a pilot customer and it happens to be UPS, and you know, I think that's enough to raise in some cases. But in other cases, I'd say like, you know, what we did personally, like, you know, in our case was we built up enough momentum with, you know, I'd say probably about, you know, theoretically we had customers, but they weren't really customers because they weren't really paying us. They were like opening up the platform to their employees. And so we used it as a user acquisition strategy, but then we did have some monetized customers, I'd say probably about 8 to 10 or so, that we were getting monthly recurring revenue.
Small and medium businesses?
One of the things you can do,
Businesses, yeah. Sorry.
one of the things you can definitely do to also alter that timeline is who are your partners, right? So for us, we had one also with Johnson & Johnson where they paid us 6 figures. We had a partnership with the CDC, partnership with a couple national associations. And even though those partnerships are very loose partnerships, they're nonetheless partnerships, and those can go a long way to add to credibility, which I think is pretty critical.
Yeah.
How did you acquire these partnerships, and what was like their contribution? And same, and that question I've asked before, how did you acquire your customers? Like what were approaches that you know that worked and that did not work, and like securing the first customer?
For the partnerships, what I basically do is go and show them really cool technology, and I say, don't you want to be a part of this? I mean, it's that easy. If you're really in a technology business and you have a solution that's powerful and can be a game changer, then you show it to somebody and say, do you want to be a partner of this? Do you want to help bring this to your customers, to the people that trust you? Then that's really how I develop the partnerships we have.
How did you get to the decision makers in companies like Johnson & Johnson, for example?
Really just networking, for lack of a better word to describe it. You know, it's figuring out who the companies are you want to target, who you want to talk to, figuring out how you can meet them. You got to have friends in your corner, I think, to be successful as a startup company. So.
Yeah, so I got a funny story to tell you. So especially when you're, first starting out, you can get clients through people that we've gotten clients through people I never would expect. So I was at a run club, okay, and I met, super nice girl. She's like, "What do you do?" And I'm like, "Oh, I have my own company." She's like, "Really? What kind of industry?" Health and wellness. "You need to talk to my HR director. We're looking for that." And I'm like, "Awesome! When can I do that?" And so we ended up building a relationship with that HR director. She brought us in, and it was never like, "Oh, so you guys have never really done this before." It was like, we had our deck. This is how it's going to work. Kind of played the part. But it came in from a trusted source, right? It's not like we just cold called this HR director. It was an employee that she already trusted referring us in there. And so that made a big difference. So the day that we're presenting to all their employees as this program is rolling out, this guy comes up to us and he's drinking a beer and he's like, "What are you guys doing? Why are you presenting to my employees?" And we're like, "Oh, well, we don't know how to respond to this." But so it's the executive or the executive director of Engage. His name is Raj Chaudhary, and he ended up being our lead investor, right? And that was over time that happened. But we were a client, and so he got to build a relationship with us. He knew us, and that's how it ended up being, in terms of our funding round. But it all started from I just bumped into someone at a run club. Right? And so like those serendipitous, those things matter a lot. Relationships matter a lot. Now it's, we'll tap our investors. Okay, we're looking at LinkedIn. We're trying to get into this client. Who do we know that's 2 or 3 degrees to this company? How do we get in, through our investors, our advisors, our existing clients, our own contacts? We'll sit down and go through that and figure out how to get into that client.
I'd say, just to dovetail on that, 3 of the investors in our round came from social media, meaning LinkedIn and Twitter. We had, I think there was another client, actually no, so in terms of clients, 3 of our existing clients paying recurring revenue employer customers came from LinkedIn. So leverage the hell out of LinkedIn, right? Like LinkedIn is your friend. If you're a startup person, learn how to basically reach out to people for feedback. Like feedback is
just the word feedback.
Fairy dust, okay? Feedback is fairy dust, okay? Like all you need to say is, I'm an entrepreneur, I'm a startup person based in Atlanta, was wondering if you might just give me 15 minutes of feedback on something I'm putting together because I value what you've done in terms of the industry or your perspective. You'd be amazed how quickly people are willing to give you their time. And then, oh, you know what, you should talk to this guy, right? Like, it's so easy in this day and age, right? Before, I can't imagine, life before LinkedIn, honestly, a freaking Rolodex or something. It's crazy, right? Sorry, go ahead, more questions. Yeah.
What stage was your company at when you guys started fundraising? Were you guys actually having your product actually built out and you had customers, or what was the stage?
Yeah, live product and customers.
Okay.
Yeah. But we weren't really, it's not like we had it figured out.
Crappy live product.
So what was that experience like, actually going out, really pitching, trying to get these people on board with your company?
It sucked. It took a lot of time.
So if you have multiple founders, right, which I'd recommend, it's always better to go in as not a solo, I know solo founders can make it work, but it's always better to be partnered up with somebody, right? So if John wasn't there holding me up on certain days, I'd be like, I think I would have called it in, and probably the vice versa, and probably with our third co-founder, right? You got to get through some really dark days of I'm literally the highs are so super high, they say roller coaster, but then the lows suck, right? Make one person responsible for fundraising, and basically that's going to distract them for 6 to 10 months. Probably 6 to 8 months, 10 months from the outset, but it's going to take a lot of hustling.
Double whatever time.
Yeah, there.
Now that your business model is shifting more from services to technology, do you still maintain any of your service revenue at all, or is that something you're trying to phase out completely?
We're trying to phase that out. Is that the ultimate objective is a scalable enterprise SaaS product, which we have certain clients with, but our goal is to end up with all clients around that.
How important is scalability to startups? Because what I've heard entirely is that's where you need to be.
For your VC, like, so if you're gonna raise money, I mean, not every business needs to raise money, right? So for us, we had to raise the angel round, but in order for us to reach scale, we will need to raise our Series A at some point next year, which is always like a tough time, because like you need to be hitting certain metrics for VCs to be interested. And like the momentum that you have is paramount, like over anything, right? The traction that you have, right? So, but it has to be the right type of traction, right? Which is kind of, you know, it sucks because it's like, you know, hey, look, we're bringing in this much revenue. They're like, well, you're a consulting business. You know, I don't really care. Like your multiples are like 2x revenue then, you know? You know, you don't want to go down that path. You want to be able to say, look, we're scalable, an enterprise technology platform. People are purchasing, you know, people are essentially subscribing to our technology platform. Then you're 10x, whatever. The multiples are much better, right, in that business. You want to add that, Stuart?
Yeah, I was gonna say recurring revenue multiples are so much more attractive than consulting multiples. So as much as you can get away from it, it's ideal. But cash in hand is always attractive, so it's a double-edged sword.
Yeah. Yeah, right here. Yeah.
So, going back even further, when you guys were just coming up with the idea, how did you find the right people, being a developer, the business, the designer, all of that, and how did you have enough momentum to kind of stick it through, I guess, a couple of years?
Yeah, I mean, I can just quickly address that. I'd say, like, we went through a lot of trial and error initially. So, like, you know, I think there's two schools of thought on is it critical for one of the co-founders to be super technical? And some people will tell you not necessarily, because there's plenty of businesses that have reached that sort of, you know, great stage without necessarily a technical co-founder. We have a technical co-founder, but he's not necessarily, you know, hacking away. We have outsourced a lot of our development. And I think there's some people that look at that and say, well, you know, like you really need a technical co-founder, and there's some investors that probably say that. I think you need to, it depends on the business, honestly, and if you have the ability to bring in somebody who's a good, strong technical co-founder, that's great. The thing with hackers that we found, and you know, I know it's probably going to offend some people, but like, a lot of them get excited initially, and then it just kind of drops off. Or the really good ones are developing their own apps, and they're trying to go out and do their own thing, right? Which is like great for them, like, but it doesn't help our cause very much. We initially found a guy who's really strong, who helped us prototype, who actually not helped us prototype, actually helped us develop the MVP, and we went out and sort of raised, you know, iterated on top of that platform. But now we have a really good partnership. I'd say it's a lot of trial and error though. You're not going to know until you try on some of that stuff.
You know, I have two technical co-founders, and I'm obviously the business co-founder, and it's definitely the trial and error, right? You know, I feel like a lot of times they step into my turf and say, well, we don't have to worry about the business, let's just do cool stuff with technology. And sometimes I make them angry because I'll come back and say, less cool, make it more functional. You know, and so it's definitely a balancing act. I think the hardest thing to do is maintain that relationship between I'm a business and I'm a technology.
We've got 3 co-founders, so one other guy. It's funny because it's like that third co-founder sometimes will just be the glue that kind of sticks the other two together. And so like Prem and I will go at it sometimes, and we've got this like father figure who comes in and like, talks to me, and then he talks to Prem, and then Prem and I talk to him. And so and then it's been like, and then it's like each of us have kind of taken that role a little bit, but it's you know, that has helped. You know, just having multiple people where when you're stuck and you don't know where to turn, you have someone else who can kind of pick you up, and that's helped a lot.
I feel like it should be 1 or 3. Because
I think so, yeah.
three at least you can break the tie, right? Whereas if you do people and disagree, then you can't really go anywhere. Now it's like, in our conversations just recently at a board meeting, it's like 2 of us are going at it, and we both look at the third person. It's like this awkward pause as though she's like the, you know, the ultimate judge here. And it really is the case because 2/3 rules, and you know, it's a good way to keep moving forward.
I mean, the statistics play out for 3 actually being sort of the best number. I mean, you can look at sort of what, like I said, there's exceptions to all these rules, right? But like putting together the team, because you're going to understand that, you know, ultimately one person's going to be strong in operations, one person might be stronger, and you should complement your skill sets. That's the thing, right? If you're looking at co-founders, make sure it's not like yeah, we're both like really strong hackers. Okay, well, great. You know, like, I mean, who's going to be out there hustling? Who's going to be out there getting in front of customers? Because you need that skill set also.
One thing to preach on about co-founders is, as much as it's not ideal to talk about, is you have to have a good operating agreement in place with reverse vesting. I mean, just period. Because what happens if you have this project you want to work on for 3 years and it's turning into a company, and one of your co-founders leaves to go live in California. You know, maybe they, you know, it's a good thing for that co-founder to go take an opportunity out there, but then for you two to equally own the company isn't necessarily fair. So I strongly suggest, urge, implore you to have reverse vesting where you earn your equity shares over time, as does everybody else.
Good after that. Anybody else? Questions?
How do you guys determine your pricing model?
Whatever they all pay.
Good stuff. That's like, honestly, I think pricing is one of the hardest things you're gonna run into, and like, we're still iterating on pricing. And I think companies that have been around for like 5, 7, 8, 10 years are still iterating pricing to some extent. So it's never going to be like a magic formula that you're like, man, we got it, nailed it, you know, like this is working, right? It's like, because you're going to be like, oh, you know what, we should probably think about rolling this in. So like packaging and pricing, we still, I can't tell you that we have it nailed down, but I can tell you that like the more sort of, you know, like I was mentioning before, like enterprise SaaS, subscription models, those are tried and true. Don't try to invent a new pricing or like essentially business model, because that's not where you want to innovate. You want to look at what's tried and true on some of the pricing models that are out there already. And you know, keep it simple, right, is the key. Because we hit the, when we started iterating on it, like we tried some stuff out, and literally like the customer that we were in front of was like, you know, you guys really need to simplify that. Like, they were just like, I have no idea what we're talking about right now. You know, like it was just way too complicated.
When we started, when I was with this company, Firethorn, we were in the mobile banking space, right? So our pricing model we went to was this a la carte pricing model where per user monthly fee for every single user that signed up to this bank app. Every time somebody transferred money, another fee. Every time somebody bought a gift card, a fee. And what ended up happening is we scaled this to, we had 400,000 users doing this. There was like a full-time person in an Excel file trying to calculate monthly bills for the customers. And it was like, the spreadsheet would crash, the computer would go down, we had to buy Cognos software just to do pricing. And it was, theoretically it makes sense on a per unit basis, but it wasn't scalable. And so that's just something you gotta really, you know, you don't wanna price something and then have to hire somebody just to manage the pricing and billing but for it. So just be careful.
So another thing that we learned on the enterprise sales side was that on the other side, someone has to get approval for that purchase decision. And so there has to be a budget. And so people can get creative about where they pull from this budget to an extent. There's like this discretionary amount, but if you're talking about at a certain level, and it could vary of price, then they have to insert a new line item in a budget. And that becomes a lot harder, right? And so, you know, what we found is that in the beginning, we would come to them with, you know, programming, and then the next month we'd come back to them, okay, now let's keep going. And we basically had to continue to get approvals. And what we found that worked so much better is that we would present to them an annual program, and we got just required one approval, right? And it had a much, obviously, bigger price tag because it was across the full board, as opposed to constantly coming back and asking, all right, here's the next statement of work, here's the next statement of work. Nope, here's the whole year statement of work. Get it approved once, and then just bill. Charge them every month.
Sell one 6 or 7 figure deal instead of
Right.
$15,000, $10,000 approvals every month.
That's what we found.
And the other thing is like on that, pilots are oftentimes coming from different budget line items. So pilots, there's a little bit more latitude on pilots than there are, you know. So if you're going into a larger organization, always be looking at a pilot, you know, as sort of your objective, because there's more latitude on some of that. I mean, obviously you can get the big sale, that's great, but pilots tend to come from different line items, and there tends to be a little bit more flexibility on that.
We walked into meetings, and like as soon as we sit down, it's like, all right guys, just want to let you know we don't have any budget. And we're like, whoa, just back off the ledge. You know, we just sat down here. You know, and then you start talking, and then you start understanding, okay, well, what are you doing today? Like, how are you doing this today? Oh, well, we do this and all this and this. And I'm like, okay, so is there like a budget for that? Well, yeah, we do have this budget. And it's like, you just like let them tell you the solution almost, and there's money there. And it's just, it's, the budgeting, we learned a lot from the budgeting, but I think the key thing there is to get the approval once, for that payment versus having to go back for approval.
Other questions, I think you
Yeah,
guys.
Stuart, at you real quick. What was that process like to getting these institutions, or did you guys work with banks and try to get them on board with this technology? You're talking about the industry, was they kind of skeptical when it comes to new technology? What was that process kind of like?
I mean, financial services and healthcare can't be any more difficult to get into. I mean, those are the two most cumbersome beasts, right? And literally living in the bank. Our CEO happened to own a private jet, and they're up in New Jersey, and so he was up there all day, every day. Same thing in the healthcare space, though. It's like these healthcare entities, Emory for one, is so big that you have to get 15 to 20 people moving in the right direction, and it is so time-consuming. I mean, there's no short answer besides you have to just be in there every day talking to everybody and having everybody say this is a good idea, because what inevitably happens is not that you get anybody that would say no if you came to them a lot of times, but what happens if somebody gets their feelings hurt, they'll slow it down, or they won't schedule a meeting, or there needs to be some approval, and they'll say, well, we can't do it this quarter, we're gonna do it next quarter. And so it's almost just like kissing everybody's ring within whatever the decision-making circle is you have to go. So, it's all good.
Even finding the decision-making circle, that can be the hardest part. And there are so many nice, lovely people that will just tell you everything you want to hear. And they have no authority to actually make a purchase.
Have you guys found that there was a learning curve with your product versus what they were currently doing, trying to really get them on board with what you're doing?
I think that's a really interesting point. You definitely need to decide if your product is ER Express already had existing customers or existing competitors in the space. And so there wasn't nearly as much of a learning curve, both for the mobile banking product and company that we did, and also for my healthcare technology company. It's all about education and awareness. And so there's definitely a lot of time you have to sort of educate the people before you even begin to sell them. And so if it's a new space, entirely new idea, it can be a much bigger home run in a lot of cases, but then there's going to be a lot of a learning curve that you have to get through.
Any other questions? I don't know if we're okay on time. We're okay to keep going?
Oh, no, we're good.
Okay, yeah.
It seems like all you guys are in sort of the gamification of wellness space. Am I, or not quite? Like rewards and.
We've evolved a little bit.
I mean, like, there's an element of rewards recognition to what we do.
Yes, I was gonna ask you, like, how big a part do you think of, like, how much time do you think about how do we bring in gaming elements that could make this more attractive? Or does it divert your attention from your real product?
Yeah, I mean, we'll probably go down a rabbit hole in terms of like rewards and recognition, just because that's like a pretty loaded topic, but it's intrinsic motivation versus extrinsic motivation. I mean, we're struggling a little bit with trying not to be cheesy with the rewards and trying to get to a platform that's actually going to be like long-term viable, but also isn't something that just flames out, because there's a lot of like there's sort of a lot of gamification and stuff that's going on that's happened that's already flamed out a little bit, and it's a little short-lived. So I don't know if your question is like, how do we make it more sustainable? But our whole objective of like rewards and recognition with our platform is to make it something that's a little bit different, that is constantly new, constantly dynamic. So that's our philosophy on gaming.
I think there's a lot of ways. We don't really use gamification right now, but I think there are a lot of ways to make something sticky, and that's really the critical idea now. I don't know what the number is, but I saw a couple of years ago, it was like 90% of the apps that people download are never used again after they're opened the first time. And it's just like, how do you deal with that? And think about that conceptually, what happens. With our banking app, we realized if a person didn't open it within 14 days, they would never go use it again probably, right? And now you're going through your potential customer base so quickly. Great, you have 200,000 downloads, but what happens if 90% of those people don't ever use it again? Well, not only are you not going to get them as a customer, they're never going to come back, and so figuring out ways to make something sticky and repetitive and intrinsic in their daily activity, I think is pretty critical. Gamification is one idea. Social elements, all these types of different ideas probably flow into that, right?
And just on rewards and recognition, companies already do it, right? Companies, it might be as manual as the admin going in the closet and getting out the shirt, but companies have a incentive recognition budget to pull from. And so we approached them and we're like, we're not going to try to sell you a new game. We're going to help you automate what you're already doing. You already have people managing this. How are they doing that? Oh, the spreadsheets, awesome. And so we're essentially trying to make the people that we're selling to, we're going to make your life easier using our technology for what you're already doing. And I know that was probably a little side to your direct question, but thought I'd throw that out.
Other questions?
Maybe over here.
Oh,
Sorry. Sure, you want to get a left or
we'll
right?
go over here. That's fine.
Sorry about the weird angle. How, like, business particular are your businesses and the startups you've been involved in? By that, I mean, how closely, so you talked a lot about the external budgets that you have to work with your customers. Like, how, like, tightly do you budget yourselves and watch your costs and things like that? Or do you kind of leave that for a later stage in the business?
Yeah. So
I can
go ahead.
Yeah. So I actually own another company, and it's a staffing and consulting company. And I've owned this company for about 3 years now, and it's making money, it's doing okay. The first year and a half, I actually was really, really into the numbers. And now, maybe this is bad to say, but honestly, I know what the company's doing before I even look at the P&L. I can pull up the P&L and say, oh, well, I already knew that, right? And so it's, I think, really, really important to understand how your business operates and understand the numbers behind it early on. But probably after a couple of years, you really gut know what's going on, and you know. I can tell you right now, my next 6 weeks of cash flow, what it's going to look like just without even looking at my computer, you know, and so.
Yeah, I would just add to that, like if you have a potential investor that's getting really caught up in your financial model and really wants to see 10 years out, like, you know, I'm not sure about 5 years out, I'm like, why are you not trying to make, no one believes those freaking numbers, right? Like these financial projections, and investors have paid a lot of attention to, it's one thing to pay attention to the micro, like how are you making money, right? Like, I mean, what's the business model? Another thing to get caught up in, you know, why are you not, I want to see $100 million. I mean, like, you know, you're going to get some investors that are really caught up in that. I think probably like you got to question whether they're really early stage investors or not. Because for the most part, early stage investors tend to be much more looking at the team and your ability to execute, your ability to have gotten customers. Customers trump all. Like you cannot argue with customers, right? So you can't argue enough to say like traction is everything, particularly in early stage financing. It's really easy to start a company today, right? But it's not really easy to grow it. It's never been harder actually than to grow it, right? So if you focus in on, like I said, like early stage prototyping, getting some of the customers in the door, you're going to get some of that momentum, and you're going to be able to tell your own story because traction is going to be your story, and you're going to have early stage investors saying, okay, that's, you know, I can't argue with that, right? I can't argue with the fact that you have 3, 4, 5, 6, 8, 10 paying customers, right?
I think noise is, I mean, if you're starting a company, noise is your biggest enemy. There's thousands of new startups in every single space every day. You know, you go to a healthcare technology conference and there's 60 people talking about how their wellness app or their EMR platform, whatever it's going to be, is the next great thing. And so how do you rise above that noise, and how do you separate yourself out? And it's probably traction, it's customers, and it's something novel and unique that other people don't have. So that's really where you focus, and then money will happen.
In the beginning, it's you know, it's probably more about top line. You know,
Yeah.
what are you bringing in? And then, so here's the scenario. Here's a real life example. This is going back to our services side of the business. So we have this 12-month program with this employer, and every month we're bringing in basically a kind of an awesome experience. And so this is, you know, groups going to kayaking on the Chattahoochees, and Segway tours. This is, you know, chef cooking, wine tasting events, all this crap. It's awesome, but it's anyway. So we have, I'm not. Prem's doing the Zumba class, I'm just kidding. So we're pulling in vendors to do this, right? So we have an internal cost for that, right? So we come up with this program, we understand what our costs are, and then now we're at the point where we're saying, okay, on average, we have an account manager who is responsible for this employer, and we're going to say, okay, on average, we're spending roughly 10 hours on that client, you know, times an hourly rate, and so we're getting kind of like that unit cost of our cost of goods sold and what we're paying out to a vendor to make that happen, plus, you know, our time costs, and we're getting a little bit more granular now in terms of where is our actual margin, what do we need to charge them on a monthly basis for it to make sense.
Yeah.
And so, and the last thing is just, so now we're at the point where, you know, we have pretty much a price point where we know where it makes sense for us to at least minimum start out, and then, you know, we won't chase that other client that just isn't going to pay it.
2 metrics that are really important to hone in on: lifetime value of customer and your cost of customer acquisition. like, if you're gonna talk to any investor, they're gonna wanna know what's the average lifetime value of the customer, and what was your cost to acquire that customer. So if you gotta nail those down pretty quickly and kind of have an understanding of how, so for B2C, okay, so we're doing Facebook ads, we're doing Google ads, okay, so like, we're gonna bring in, you gotta like just look at the waterfall, the funnel basically, of like, what you're gonna get in. For B2B, obviously it's a little bit different, but you want that, you want the lifetime value of the customer, some would argue to be, 3x, 4x of the cost of customer acquisition. In some businesses, maybe 5 to 7x, 10x of that cost of customer acquisition. Other questions? Yeah.
Does this have to be a really accurate, detailed list of customer acquisition, like, your every single breakdown of everything you ever did? And
I mean, I think like the more experience you have around, like, okay, well, if I look at our customer acquisition, okay, it's a few meetings, right? Over, we've seen like average of 4 or 5 touch points to the employer. What's that cost in terms of labor? What's that cost in terms of other expenses, right? You can sort of make some guesstimations around that. You have to, obviously it's a little bit of guesswork on some of this, but like I said, like the more you're honed in on trying to get customers, pilot customers in earlier on, and like I'd say like just to, a little bit unrelated, but like I said before, the idea really doesn't, no one cares about the idea because the ideas are easy. The execution's where it's at, and no one cares about your business in effect, but they care about their problem. So if you're solving their problem, I'd say like we continue to struggle. It's for like, okay, let's make sure like we're honing in on what their problem is and like, being able to hone in on that. You're gonna get customers in because they want their problem solved. They don't care about your business as much as they care about their problem being solved. I know it's a little bit of a tangent, but
if you're in B2B, one of the best days that I've ever experienced was the first day I realized that I had enough customers that I could fire my low margin customers that I was either barely making money on or losing money on. Because then you have, because what happens is you start off with customers and deals and you're like, I'm just going to do it to get some traction and prove my concept. And then you add some new ones, and then all of a sudden you're like looking at your portfolio of customers and you're going, well, these bottom 2 customers I'm actually losing money on a monthly basis on. We need to renegotiate the contract, or we just need to get out of the deal pretty quickly. So that's sort of how the evolution happens, I think.
Questions? Yeah.
Yes, I wonder, in this case, when you first got started with your startup, the prototyping process you had basically, you explained, you had people who had knowledge of technology, you had the business model in general, but just more or less a continuous prototyping, continuous improvement. So things along those lines, what you would suggest for?
So you're talking about like how we approach prototyping?
Yeah, prototyping is from the very beginning, as far as like just find a technology you like and work around with it, or you evolve over time, so we'll try this, try that.
Yeah, I mean, you're gonna continuously iterate, right? I mean, you're gonna go out with something that you think is really gonna resonate. You're gonna probably change it. But like I said, like I think the basic thing to do is front-end prototyping in this day and age, right? People don't really know that it's not a live product until you have to build it then, right?
Yeah.
I think one of the things that we really struggle with, and I'm at fault for this probably, is early on usually what happens, I believe, is that it's this continuous development and redo these continuous, let's add this button, let's move this, let's take this out, new feature, let's throw it in there. At some point you got to switch out of that world into the world of, we're going to have a new release, and then that release is going to be 4 months down the road, this is what's going to be in that release. And like, I think it probably goes from the idea to the actual business stage, and when you get out of that continuous evolution into a release cycle, right? Requirement stock and all that kind of stuff, right?
Yeah, I mean, we pretty much use a agile methodology where we'll have essentially our goal is to do 2-week iterations where we're basically coming up with the tickets that we want to get implemented. Our developers are working on that we have a meeting to review the next iteration, and it's just constantly churning.
I just get drunk and email my developers.
Yeah, that's how we really like to have it, but sometimes it's like that.
I think that's why I'm sometimes at 7 employees and sometimes at 8. At 8 point, I'll email her and be like, I need this tomorrow, and then.
You sometimes do it with like a field of dreams mentality. If you build it, they will come.
Should you do that?
I mean, do you at times? I mean, you're talking about your prototypes and developing them.
Yeah. I mean, ultimately, you're gonna go out with a hypothesis, right? And you're like, okay, my hypothesis is that X has this problem or pain point. I need to go basically validate that that's the case. The way that I'm gonna validate that, like, so there's two things, right? Like, customer discovery to me is like, you don't go out there and be like, hey, what do you think about this, right? Because everyone's gonna be like, it's really awesome, I really like it, you know? And particularly, like, this is a funny story, like, I lived in New York for like 8.5 years, and then I came down here and I was like, God, everybody's really nice here, you know? And I was like, but, you know, nice isn't what you need sometimes. You need people to be like, let them tell you their problems first. Sit down with the people that you think have this problem, and don't tell them anything about your solution. Start out with asking them about their, you know, their history, their background, what processes they have in place as it relates to the thing that you're looking at. Identify what they're sort of honing in on in terms of pain points. Validate that the pain point actually exists to some extent. You can do that through just natural conversation. And then get to a point where you're like, can I, you know, you mind if I show you something really quickly? You can give me some feedback on it. But by that point, they haven't really, like, they're not biased to, like, you know, this guy's trying to show me something and I feel like I have to be nice to him. That's a really tough thing to kind of understand, is that you're going to show people that prototype and you're going to show people that front end, you know, whatever it might be that you're developing, and they're going to feel like they really need to be nice, and they're going to, nobody's going to be like, dude, I'm never going to use this. Like, I don't know what you're talking about, you know? I mean, most people won't.
Basically, don't come off salesy.
Don't come off salesy. I mean, set up conversations with those folks, like I was saying in LinkedIn. I mean, just very tactical advice, right? Is like, validate the pain point that you have actually exists by talking to the people that are out there. You might have your own personal experience with that, which is really valuable.
At some point when you do have to take that first step and build something, whatever you build, you should build it so it's so uncomfortable that you actually don't want to let it go out of the door, right? You know, it's like the bare minimum that you can get away with. You know, literally I have situations where my developers will have something and I'm like, we're pulling the tablet back and forth. I'm like, I'm going to deploy it. We're going to go test it with real customers, and then, you know, they're screaming, no, don't do that. You got to really, you know, if it's going to work, it's probably going to work at a crappier level than what it will eventually be. And so if you do have to build it and take that first leap of faith, do it in a very minimalist way. Yeah.
Absolutely. David Cummings says, like, you know, like from Atlanta Tech Village, he's the guy that basically bought the building up and is establishing Tech Village right from Pardot. It's like, be a painkiller, don't be a vitamin. Yeah. And so that's like, I think that's fantastic advice, because you want to, like, even if you feel like you're, oh, well, you know, the nature of our business isn't necessarily painkiller. Well, how do we make it such that, you know, we can position it as a painkiller?
The vitamin industry is big though.
Yeah, it's true. Can't argue with that.
Well, anybody that has a Corvette's that new Stingray.
Yeah, exactly. Just love that.
All right, great. I think we're going to wrap up this part, take a break for our next one. Why don't we thank everyone. For you guys.
Yeah.
It'd be great too. We want to get a picture, like a panorama. So if you guys could like come up in front with you guys in front, we'll get a picture like looking this way. You guys are down for that? Okay, close to this way. That makes more sense. Yeah, yeah. Just stand like.